Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Steve Leibowitz, and the hot topic tonight, of course, the judicial overhaul. Last night, after midnight, the Knesset passed the symbolic first reading of the first piece of its planned changes in the judiciary. The vote came after another day of tumultuous protests by tens of thousands of those opposed to the plan. Now we are the day after, and so, what's next? First, I want to introduce my guests, both quite expert in the proposals. First, I'm honored to introduce former Israeli Deputy State Attorney Yehuda Schaefer. And our second guest, Michael Kleiner, a former Knesset member and president of the Supreme Court of the Likud Party. And gentlemen, thanks for being with us. First, I wanted to ask Mr. Schaefer, after the first reading of the overhaul have now taken place, finally, what's your impression of what took place yesterday, both outside the Knesset and inside the Knesset?
Well, I think it's a little bit alarming from my point of view. I don't object to reform, judicial reform, but what we see here is the first part of the reform, which was separated and being rushed through. My guess is because it's to serve the personal interest of Aryeh Deri and Netanyahu. So out of the full reform, which was presented by Justice Minister Levin, at least the first floor, so the second, third, and fourth floor, he's still non-transparent about. He will not tell us, the public, what's in the second, third, and fourth floor. But he said there's more to come. And now we're doing only the first floor. And then out of the first floor, they only took out these two elements, which is the politicization of the appointment, promotion, and firing of judges in Israel, and no judicial review over basic laws. And this was separated from the main suggestions, from the main reform. So we don't have a full reform now. We don't have a full plan. We have only a segment, which apparently is being rushed through for political reasons. So I'm actually quite not happy. I would like to see a real debate over a full reform, fully transparent, with all its elements known to the public. And that could be, of course, debated, and I think there could be compromises reached on every one of the elements. But the way it is being pushed through now, totally ignoring the protests outside, totally ignoring legitimate criticism, which I will go into later if you want, I think it is quite alarming.
All right, well, let's turn to Michael Kleiner. Justice Minister Levin called it a great day for democracy. Was it?
Yeah, 100%. There's no connection with Deri or Netanyahu. Levin is preaching for a reform in the judicial system of Israel. Since the revolution, Aaron Barak, a previous Supreme Court judge, made 30 years ago, actually usurping the power to legislate from the parliament, from the people, from the government, and installing the Supreme Court as a higher authority that has the ability and authority to abolish any government decision, any law made by the Knesset. Actually, in a way, it was a legal dictatorship until yesterday, and yesterday was the first step to bring Israel to become a democracy again. Those parts of the, I would say, conservative revolution of Yariv Levin that were approved yesterday are actually the core of the changes. And the first one of them is the only issue that you cannot compromise on the principle. You can compromise on the details, but not on the principle. And this, I mean, the way of appointing judges. Until now, actually, there was a guaranteed majority for the left in the Israeli Supreme Court because 3 judges were voting with the left. When they are in power, they have 8 out of 9 members of the committee to appoint judges. Majority of politicians, by the way, because also the Bar Association are politicians, are elected politically, and they usually vote with the Supreme Court judges. And on the other, and when Likud is in government, yes, then you have to make a compromise because thanks to a law several years ago, three members of the committee have a blocking power. So when Likud is in the government, it is divided half and half. And when the left is in power, it is 100% judges appointed by the left, as if America, which, by the way, all the Supreme Court judges are appointed by politicians, today can only elect a democratic judge. Every vacancy will be filled by a democratic judge. This is a system. The democratic president will appoint a judge, and the majority of the Senate will approve it. When Trump was president, it was vice versa. What Yariv Levin is offering is not giving a majority to the right, not giving a majority to the politicians. What he offers is to have a balanced Supreme Court which represent all the parts of the Israeli society and all parts of the Israeli political spectrum. Because today it is left, and if we don't change the system, it will be up to eternity a left Supreme Court, as if America would have adopted today the Israeli wonderful system. So it would have been a conservative,
we have to have a discussion.
Majority forever.
We have to have a discussion, and not only.
I need to respond to that.
You will respond, but I have to respond myself. I spent a lot of time in Beit Jabotinsky over the years, and I've been listening to what a lot of the people that I respect from Likud over the years had to say. In Likud, in Beitar, and also back to the days of Cherut. I've heard what Ruby Rivlin has to say. Are you saying that there is no room for compromise? The judicial reform will go forward as has been presented by Levin. This is what's good for the people of Israel? And the talks
negative,
and discussions?
Totally negative. There are 5 points, as the President of Israel mentioned, in the reform, conservative reform of Yariv Levin. On 4 of them, we are ready to go very far away, to meet in the middle of the way with the opposition and to make a compromise, including the overpowering of laws, the majority needed to abolish Knesset laws, the majority needed to overcome this legislation, the legal advisors, the attorney generals. All this is compromisable. Also, the system to elect judges, you make a compromise as long as there will be a system that will guarantee equality and not continue a situation that all the Supreme Court is representing half of the Israeli people and not all of it.
All right, Mr. Schaefer, I want to give you a chance to respond, but I also want to add to this. Well, you have Mr. Kleiner here. He's the head of the Supreme Court of the Likud. Maybe we'll have people like him on the regular Supreme Court a few years down the line. What's wrong with that?
I'm over the age. No legal possibility.
Okay, so I strongly disagree with my friend. Describing the court as left-wing is just absolutely ridiculous. This is the court that has authorized hundreds of settlements in the West Bank over the years. This is the court that has supported almost every military action by Israel, and rightly so, by the way. I support all this, but describing this court as a left-wing court is just pure nonsense by the right wing. But let's go to the plan itself, because it's extremely dangerous and it endangers Israeli democracy. There is no country in the world that has a system that was voted on by the Knesset yesterday, and if it passes second and third, we will be the only country in the world that has this system. What do I mean? We're talking not about appointments to a constitutional court or to the High Court. We're talking about appointments to the lowest of lowest courts, the Shalom, Mechazi, district courts, and the Supreme Court. We're talking about promotions from lower court to medium court, from medium district court to High Court. We're talking about the ability to remove judges as well. All these will now be in the power not of parliament, but of the coalition. The coalition, and indirectly, it will appoint 2 ex-judges, which Mr. Kleiner can be, by the way, one of them. It's not, there's no age limitation. And the president of the court, who will now also be elected by the politicians, will be able to elect 2 external ex-judges who will be also the long arm of the coalition. So we don't have full representation of all the Knesset. We have representation of the coalition only, and the ability to control the judges in a way which will strongly jeopardize the impartiality and the integrity of the courts in Israel, and destroy the wonderful reputation that Israel has, which not only attracts investment to Israel, but has also been a shield protecting our soldiers and our anybody involved in the hostilities and the dealing with the West Bank and all the other the challenges Israel has, because we've always had a respected court authorizing and the legality of all these. I'm afraid that if this becomes a political appointment, a court appointed by coalitions, doesn't matter which coalition, and being impartial, not being impartial, because the promotion of judges and the future of judges depending on politicians, we will be becoming more and more like Poland, like Hungary, and maybe even worse countries like Russia. Gradually, this is not overnight. It's not the end of democracy, but this is a beginning of a very bad trend, which endangers the future democracy of Israel, in my view.
Let me try to ask you both a question which maybe will have a bit of an optimistic sound. President Herzog has said to both sides, to everyone, let's come together, come to my house. I'll provide tea and biscuits. We will sit here and we will talk until we work out an agreement. I have a feeling that if the two of you gentlemen came to the president's house, each tasked with trying to work out the details of a judicial reform moving forward, you might actually not be that far apart. And like the president says, after several days, you may actually come out with an agreement. Would it be possible for the two of you, for example, to sit together and work out judicial reform that would make sense to both sides?
I believe the answer is yes, because what I heard from my dear friend, Mr. Scheffer, is slogans, which I'm very sorry to say it have no substance behind it, because he didn't give one argument why, if there will be two judges like Solberg, instead of two judges like Chayut or somebody else from the liberal part of the Supreme Court, they will not protect people, they will not protect the army, they will not make justice for Israeli citizens who will approach the court. And my answer is yes, because I heard very carefully the president's compromise. And the president is not suspected to be part of the Likud. On the contrary, he was the Labour Party candidate against Netanyahu in the election. And I believe that the president's compromise is acceptable. It is a good basis for a compromise. So if Mr. Scheffer accepts the compromise or the basic principles of the president's compromise, so definitely there is a place for a negotiation and agreement.
Well, let's hear from Mr. Scheffer.
Well, okay. First of all, Mr. Kleiner, I of course have nothing against Noam Solberg, who's supposed to be our next president of the court, and I strongly advocate for that, and do not want the politicians to start meddling about who will be the president of the court. He should be our next high justice, and I totally support that. I support Weizmann's suggestion too. His suggestion included a solution for the committee appointment of judges, which is very different and does not give a full majority, an automatic majority to the coalition. If there will be a committee appointing judges, which does not have automatic majority of the coalition, I can support that, of course. On the other elements of the reform, it's much easier to get to. I'm sure Mr. Kleiner and I and any other two serious lawyers can negotiate an agreement much easier. The main issue is the appointment of judges issue, and that's the most controversial one. I'm afraid Levin does not want to compromise on that. That's my feeling. If he's willing to accept the president's offer on that, which is adding two members of the public, which will be agreed by both sides, that could be a good compromise and could balance things out the way they are more or less today. But unfortunately, I don't see any goodwill on this point from the side of the Minister of Justice. Although let's stay optimistic, it's too much is at stake.
Well, the president is
my concept, I want to be very clear about it. My concept is that as the president's offer save of those two joint appointments, 5 coalitions, 3 ministers and 2 members of the Knesset, against 1 member of the Knesset and 3 judges. So the additional 2, if there is no consensus, of course, one will be appointed by the Supreme Court president and one by Mr. Levin. This will give a narrow majority support to the coalition, I want to be honest, but when Likud will be in opposition, it will be 10 against 1. There will be 10 members of the left against 1 member of the right. This is not balanced, but as long as the compromise gives the equality, the parity, when we are in power, we appoint more judges. When they are in power, they appoint majority of judges. We can live with it.
Well, I'm going to make
the counting of the court on the side of the non-Likud is just absolutely ridiculous. I appeared for 10 years in front of
Whenever did they support one conservative judge?
1 second, one at a time. One at a time. One at a time.
Let me finish my idea.
Mr. Kleiner, we have to.
Never was supported by any of those judges. Never. Together with the left, they voted against it.
All right, let Mr. Sheffer respond. Go ahead.
Okay, so I appeared for 10 years. I was an attorney. I was in the Bagatz department. I appeared before these judges. This was many years ago, but this was years when, by the way, when judges like Shamgar, Dov Levin, and Netanyahu, extreme right-wing judges, were appointed by the left-wing parties. So appointment of judges was never a political issue, was never a partisan issue in Israel.
And those times they didn't deal with politics. It was before the Barat Revolution. They were professional judges.
I'm sorry to disagree with you. There were highly political contentious issues like who's a Jew and like other issues which were highly controversial and politically. This is nonsense.
Not according to party lines. Not according to party lines.
We're not going to resolve all this. Let's deal with our problems of today.
And unfortunately, now that Netanyahu has gone into judicial trouble, things are suddenly different. The last 5 appointments to the Supreme Court of Israel.
Why do you put Netanyahu in? He's not connected, he's not involved, and he was against it in the past.
Why isn't the reform being...
It's totally a Riv Levin initiative.
Then answer me. Then why are only 2 segments of the reform being pushed? Why aren't they doing the whole reform together? Why are they rushing through these 2 segments only? There's only one possible answer to solve the dairy problem and Netanyahu problem. Now, I just wanted one more sentence. There's 5...
1 second. Michael, we can't hear both of you at the same time.
Now affect the Netanyahu appeal.
I want you to look at the last 5 judges that were appointed to the Supreme Court under a new legislation requiring 7 out of 9, which we can see that much more conservative judges have been appointed, and the former Minister of Justice.
Because Labour is not in power. If Labour would have been in power alone, they would have appointed...
Gentlemen, we're going to have to pull this together.
And Rothman had a block of 3 to force the majority to make a compromise.
All right, we're going to be wrapping up soon.
The former Minister of Justice already agreed on a public hearing for judges, Supreme Court judges, which is also a step forward, and we haven't even tried that for a year or 2. My major concern is not in the Supreme Court judges. My major concern is the appointment of Shalom judges and district court judges, which will now have to go to the Likud party and get their support. Otherwise, they will have no chance to be promoted. They will be totally... I'm begging you to think about this, Mr. Kleiner. This whole reform should be...
And today they are scrutinized by the judges.
This whole reform...
scrutinized by the judges.
Let me just finish my sentence. Let me just finish my sentence.
They even don't let pass a judge who doesn't pass the judges.
The whole reform should be focused only on the Supreme Court judges. Only. The Shalom and district court judges should be appointed the same way.
This may be a compromise.
They agree with each other. Right after this program...
As the law passed yesterday, any lawyer who wants to be appointed to Shalom or to the district court will have to go and start getting political support from the Likud party. That is just going to damage the Israeli judicial system.
Gentlemen, we're almost ready to wrap up. I need to ask you both one more question. Let's bring it back together for one more question because we're almost out of time, but I really wanted to hear your reaction to this. I've watched a lot of speeches in the Knesset over the years, of course, dating back to the days of Menachem Begin. Last night's speech by Justice Minister Levin was one of, to my mind, in my ears, was one of the most shocking speeches I've ever heard in terms of it being insulting to the other side and triumphant and certainly not sounding like compromise. I'd like to hear both of your takes on that. I
didn't hear yesterday's speech, but when he presented presented the program on television the first time, he was very cool, very correct, very not insulting, unlike the other side, including the ex-Supreme Court Barak and Supreme Court Judge Chayut, which were very going into slogans which have no foundation.
Mr. Schaefer, did you get a chance to hear it?
Yes, and I recommend it to Mr. Kleiner to watch it because they were in much bigger trouble than he might seem. Levin is extremely behaving extremely, as you described it. He's very triumphant. He's not projecting any willing to compromise. He's been dreaming about this for 20, 30 years. He was wrong 20 years ago. He's even more wrong now because things have improved so much since, with the help of El Shaked and other Minister of Justice who changed things drastically. The Supreme Court is not the same court that it was when Levin dreamt about these reforms. He has to update himself, and he has to stop being so controversial.
All right, it's time for me to say goodbye, but I would like a one-word answer from each of you. If we were to look ahead 3 months from now, will this all be behind us and we'll have a judicial reform that everyone will be accepting, or will we have a judicial overhaul as envisioned by Yariv Levin? Mr. Kleiner, what do you think?
I believe that between the first and the second and third reading, like I know from my experience as member of Knesset, you sit in the committee, you discuss every article, and if the other side comes with clean hands and want to reach a compromise must be reached. Otherwise, there will be no legislation in 3 or 4 months because they can drag it forever. And I believe that if they will accept the basis that there must be a reform, as the president even offered it.
Finally,
so
we're out of time. Mr. Schaefer, what do you think, Mr. Schaefer?
I hope my friend Mr. Kleiner is right. It is possible. Unfortunately, I think we're going to see issues regarding Deri and Netanyahu overriding here. And even Mr. Kleiner, when you interview us in 2-3 months, we'll have to admit it. But I really hope I am wrong.
Thank you both for being with us. I learned a lot. Thanks to our guest, former MK and head of the Likud Supreme Court, Michael Kleiner, and former Israeli Deputy State Attorney, Yehuda Sheffer. And thank you for joining us at home. I'm Steve Leibowitz, and this was ILTV's Insider. Please tune in next time for more on the most pressing stories in Israel. And let us know in the comments section online if there's a topic that you feel we should be covering. And finally, also follow all of our latest updates from Israel. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv. And lots of love and shalom from Jerusalem. Thank you.